Hi guys, Emma here, and today I'm going to be talking some more about Twin Peaks with some random topics. I've moved position because the light over there is getting on my nerves. Got the box and I'm just going to get started. Does the return symbolise how Lynch feels, Lynch and Frost I guess, feels about how Western civilization has deteriorated? Yeah. So I think that's an interesting interpretation, and I think that to fully explore that you might need to perhaps look at some biographical aspects of Frost and Lynch to find evidence to suggest that this might have been their intention. It might be worth exploring David Lynch's movies for evidence of similar themes or motifs. It might be worth considering the eras in which Mark Frost and David Lynch grew up in, and how historical events and cultural shifts might have influenced them. Just as one recent kind of form of evidence, the book Conversations with Mark Frost by David Bushman may be quite illuminating in that aspect, with Frost having a lot of opinions about the changes in society and societal frameworks in general in relation to his work, and that includes Twin Peaks, but also of the threats to like the American family caused by political influences and community relationships as well. There's stuff in that book too which is in the form of an interview with Frost, which deals with man's soul and the human expression of good and evil, as well as Frost's musings on religious ideas of these opposing forces, and his belief that we should accept some kind of self-responsibility. So all of that might be important in thinking about why season 3 was crafted to be so radically bleak and dystopian. Lynch's interest in transcendental meditation as a way to transform society for the better might be important. The David Lynch Foundation aims to promote things like peace, creativity, joy and happiness, as well as harmony, and they have a particular awareness of the problem areas in society such as homelessness and people who are imprisoned, in trying to get this meditation to be rolled out to them. Some of Lynch's other major movies also have that common thread of there being this dark, niggling underbelly of wrong that's threatening to kind of worm its way into more placid parts of society. But without even delving into all of that stuff, and assuming that the language of Twin Peaks speaks for itself and allows for a death of the author kind of scenario or reading, then I think that this theory has legs. I think we can all agree that season 3 was terrifyingly bleak. It's funny actually, because prior to this season starting I wondered if it was going to be more explicitly violent and gory or overtly sexual in offensive ways, just because of how the show had pushed boundaries before. But I think I was really unprepared for the psychological impact and trauma that it would have on me, and that it would inflict upon the rest of the audience, it seems, as well. And one of the reasons I think that season 3 can get to that vulnerable place in the heart and the mind is by that relentless exposure to that completely fractured society and that world of darkness, and how that's harming people on an individual level. I'm not really sure that there's a lot in this season that feels right, that feels okay. There's a lot of sickness, both physical and psychological. There's a lot of young people who have various problems, such as they are either apathetic, or they are emotionally disconnected, or they're displaced from events that are happening, or they're downright cruel. I think some of the scenes at the Roadhouse with those various random characters could be commentary on the poor education that exists now, as well as class ambitions, or the lack of, that drive to be something more than you can be. And that striving to achieve a richer sentience, perhaps. The decay that we see in season 3 exists in all of these elements and more. Health, physical and mental, morality, peaceful cooperation with one another, intelligence, ambition. The decline of the political landscape is explored, and Dr. Amp might have something to say about that. And episode 8 has to be part of this conversation as well, I feel. Whether you look at episode 8 metaphorically or you take it as it is, as actual external evil crawling into our consciousnesses. Consciousnesses, I don't know if that's a word. That's a strong comment, I think, about the changing moral character of mankind and what that means for individuals as well as collective society. So ultimately, yes, I think that's a good theory. Do some scenes in Twin Peaks take place after the Odessa world? Well, I think a lot of the scenes in Twin Peaks are in a state of achronicity. Is that a word? Achronicity? Achronicity? I don't know if I'm making that up, but I think what I'm trying to say is that it's almost impossible to establish a correct chronology of events. That's obviously part of the puzzle. I know there's a lot of theories about Cooper and things focusing on what he's wearing, his badge and his hairstyle as he moves through the various lodge scenes. And I know that some fans have theoried that some of the scenes from the Roadhouse, particularly those ones with the very random characters again, actually take place in the Odessa world. So in that case, it's probably worth thinking about the Odessa world. It's still up for interpretation. Did it always exist, or did it exist before Cooper entered it? Does it have a real history? I do think that some of those Roadhouse scenes colour that gritty feel that we get in the season, and there's also that idea about Audrey's awakening might be related to the blackout at the end of the Odessa world scenario. So potentially her awakening could be actually the only scene we see post-Odessa world. And I have to give credit to the person that I was discussing that with in the comments recently about Audrey's awakening and when that might happen, because I think they came up with that idea. But it's hard to decipher. And once again, I feel like a lot of discussions end with this comment, but I really think it's down to how you interpret it personally and ultimately what theory that you decide on. Since you've asked that question though, I'm wondering if you have a theory, and if you have, whether you'd like to share it in the comments. High school girls and older men, and how acceptable is that in the original Twin Peaks? So in the original run of Twin Peaks, I think that it was kind of part of that kinky appeal, that there was a degree of inappropriateness, whether that be mild and is never acted upon, as in the case of Cooper and Audrey, or playful in nature like Gordon and Shelley, perhaps.
Acts like he's never seen a kiss before.
But there was much more obviously some very perverse relationships like Ben Horn and Laura's relationships with various men. And obviously some of that content is just playfully saucy and some of it is repulsive. And that's part of that narrative. And part of that creating some of the characteristics of the players involved. Cooper's response to Audrey's crush, for example.
Audrey, you're a high school girl.
Establishes that he's pretty morally upstanding. Whereas we can determine that some of the men who are involved with Laura have far less attractive qualities, to say the least. I think that on some level there's a disconnect with reality. It kind of reminds me of watching a horror movie. We're all happy to sit through a slasher movie, for example, and we can even have a giggle about it. But we know that if anything happened like that in real life, that we would run a mile, or we would scream, or we would go crazy. So I think that there maybe is that divide between real life and fiction here. Plus, a lot of the actresses involved were obviously older than the ages they were playing, and I'm not sure if that made it more acceptable as well. But I think that if there were instances like this in real life, then we'd quite rightly be horrified by it. Just one more thing on that as well is that historically, I think it's quite common for men in movies and in TV to be paired up with women who are quite a lot younger. It's always been something that annoys me. I find it very refreshing when an actual actor has a woman of the same age playing opposite him in a romantic role, because it just feels a little less sexist. It reminds me of that scene of the audition in Mulholland Drive with the very much older actor playing against Betty, Naomi Watts. But yeah, definitely I think in this case that scenario was established to create that world of horror in Twin Peaks, and also to parent contrasted against people like Cooper. The idea of Laura being a symbol of balance is wrong. She wanted to die and was extremely out of balance in Fire Walk with Me. That's true. So I think a lot of us have this idea of the golden orb being sent as an antidote in a way to Bob. You know, it was the dark orb versus the golden orb, and that would balance out that good and evil. But there's no question that Laura was under the gun, so to speak, that it certainly seemed in Fire Walk with Me that the dark side was winning. But I think I've said this recently, that maybe her self-sacrifice was in a way the light winning. So there is a theory, which is not my own, in which Laura is sent as a sacrifice for the evil to kill in order to allow others who are possibly stronger than Laura to come and stop Bob. And there's also the idea that she inspired so many people. She had a great influence in the town in many ways. You know, she was a volunteer, she gave up her time, she was a teacher, she was a friend, she helped mentally ill people. She was an inspiration to all her classmates by being a representative of the school community. A lot of people loved Laura Palmer, the good side of Laura Palmer, and a lot of people didn't know about the bad side of Laura Palmer. And, you know, it's tough to say, but I think the bad side of Laura Palmer was driven by the abuse and not through personal choices. I don't think she could help herself. And I honestly don't know whether there was any kind of awakening moment when Laura puts the ring on in the train car. So I think it's harder to accept the idea that the golden orb is sent to balance out that evil and the good, and that she's sent to suppress that evil and to bring good there because of the fact that Laura was so troubled. And I think that in many ways that trauma in her life overshadows all of the good stuff that she was, all of the good things that she inspired. But I think if you look at a world without Laura, it's dark, it's depressing. Is that the season 3 that we're seeing, is that a result of Laura not being there? Partly a result of that. So I think a lot of things have to be added together to make a conclusion on that. But I can certainly see that point. Candie's and other girls' relationships with the Mitchum brothers. Okay, so gotta be honest, when I first watched The Return, I didn't really enjoy the depiction of Candie, Sandie and Mandie. I thought it was demeaning a little bit old-fashioned and sexist, I guess. It made the brothers, I guess, seem a bit misogynistic. I did really like the way that they look, the aesthetic of that, the visual impact of their outfits, their makeup, their beauty, the pattern of 3. And initially I felt really sorry for Candie because I thought that she was possibly traumatized by something that had happened to her in her life, and that the brothers weren't really acknowledging that and forcing her into this life of servitude to them, where she was having to exploit her sexual assets. I think that Candie is obviously an endearing character. She has that comedic side to her. I think perhaps she has a younger soul inside her than her actual age, her physical age. And I think it's through that love of Candie that you ultimately soften towards the Mitchum brothers as well a little bit. Because at first, some of the scenes where the Mitchum brothers interact with Candie and the girls, they seem a bit hard towards her, but then later on in the series I think that relaxes a little bit and they come across more as protective figures.
You both have hearts of gold.
They do. I find it interesting and slightly disturbing though that the other 2 girls are never addressed and don't play a part in the scenes in the same way that Candie does. If Candie really did have those kind of concentration lapses and things, it's interesting that the Mitchum brothers would actually target her as the person to get things done amongst those 3 women. One thing I do feel is that Candie would be quite a good resident of Twin Peaks, and ultimately she ends up there. I don't know if the same is true of the other girls. However, I do believe that Mark Frost said in a casual Reddit post that Candie is still in Las Vegas. I think on rewatching The Return, the three girls become much more lovable and fun characters, are part of that Dougie storyline that is the positive part of Twin Peaks, even though there's that sadness about Cooper being sort of trapped in the Dougie role. And I think ultimately that Candie has this goodness that shines out. It's a purity that you don't usually connect with girls who have had an abusive history or have ended up with nowhere to go, as I think one of the Mitchum brothers says about Candie. You would imagine that she might be hardened and bitter, but actually she's quite the opposite. She is someone who evidently cares about people very much, sees the Mitchum brothers as possibly her saviours. I know that Amy Shields said that she played it that way, and that she thought of them as like two guys who had rescued Candie and given her something to kind of live for. And probably if the other two girls had more involvement, it might have diluted Candie's effect. Maybe there's even some question of if the Mitchum brothers had not have had that experience of helping someone like Candie, then maybe they couldn't have provided that help to Dougie as well. Maybe they would have just taken what they could and abandoned Dougie. Maybe they developed some kind of conscience and a heart through their experiences with Candie. And I know that there's a lot of theories about Candie as well, such as she may not be who she seems to be, and that maybe she's manufactured, maybe she was created as a way to help the Mitchum brothers help Dougie, or that maybe she was some kind of conduit through which Laura could reach Dougie / Cooper. Of course, Candie is quite like Dougie in the way that she has that strange brain mist, so there are a lot of parallels there which might feed into that. Ultimately, I think Candie, Sandie and Mandie is one of the lasting images of Twin Peaks The Return. It's a visual that's very memorable to me and which strongly connects to the Dougie storyline and how that evolves to at the end when she's there. Candie is quite at the forefront of that scene, like she's very prominent. I don't know if that is important. But yeah, definitely on further viewings, definitely appreciate Candie, Sandie and Mandie much more and see things differently perhaps than I first saw them, and that relationship with the Mitchum brothers in a different perspective as well. I'm really hot today, I don't know why. It's not even a hot day, it's freezing outside. But thank you very much for watching today, and I still have, I'm not sure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think I've got about 3, 4, I can't count. 6. I've got 6 topics at the moment. If you want to leave another topic, you can do in the comments below. Thank you very much for all of your comments so far. I really enjoy reading them all, and it's quite surprising to me how things always come up about Twin Peaks that are still coming up, even when we're a few years out from season 3 ending. And I feel like it's illuminating and it's still a fun experience for me, and I hope that you're enjoying discussing with each other in the comments as well, theories and stuff. So that's it really. Thanks again, and see you next time hopefully. Bye.